Hello and welcome to our presentation on the proposed Melbourne to Sydney high-speed rail network project. My name is Shannon Mortimer and I'm joined by my teammates Hannah Wuniecki and Patrick Smith, who you will hear from further into the presentation. Today we will introduce the risk assessment undertaken for the three construction phases of the proposed Melbourne to Sydney high-speed rail network project, prepared on behalf of the Australian Federal Government. The risk assessments are based on industry standard models ISO 31000 and AS/NZS 4360. To provide context into the reasonings for choosing the mentioned risk assessment models, I will first provide context to the Federal Government's proposed project to build a high-speed rail network system between Melbourne and Sydney. The high-speed rail system will connect the two cities via a line of travel along the east coast of Australia, capturing sea views and travelling through native bushland, private farmland and crossing four major rivers. The Australian Government has proposed the high-speed rail line be modelled on the French TGV network. The French TGV network trains have a top operating speed of around 320 kilometres an hour and capacity for 485 passengers in a 10-carriage train set, meaning the proposed Melbourne to Sydney route would have the capacity to transport passengers and freight between the cities in just under 3 hours. We chose to base our construction phase risk assessments on risk management models ISO 31000 and AS/NZS 4360. Given the type and context of the project proposal, we believe these two models are most suitably appropriate. The ISO 31000 is a standard for managing risk that supersedes the AS/NZS 4360. The AS/NZS 4360 defines risk as the chance of something happening that will have an impact on objectives. The ISO 31000 definition of risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. The main point of difference is that the AS/NZS 4360 is more about the process, where the ISO 31000 is more of a holistic and evolutionary view, which establishes a number of principles that need to be satisfied before risk management will be effective. As the superseding model, the ISO 31000 provides general direction on how companies can integrate risk-based decision-making into an organisation's governance, planning, management, reporting, policies, values and culture. It enables businesses to tackle any general uncertainties and acts in assisting businesses to develop risk management strategies which aid in the identification and mitigation of risk. In doing this, it allows businesses using the model to develop a culture in which employees and stakeholders are aware of the importance of monitoring and managing risk. We thought this is an important and relevant feature to benefit the project, as it will have a large range of stakeholders across state borders and interregional areas, so clarity and accountability will contribute to the success. It is not specific to any industry or sector, so it can be used by any public, private group or individual involved. So it's an ideal overarching standard for this project. We identified three major construction phases of the proposed project to conduct risk assessments on. The chosen phases are the construction of a high-speed rail network, the construction of rail line river crossings, and the construction of rail lines in wilderness areas. We identified site-specific risk assessments as recommended in the AS/NZS 4360 risk management standard as appropriate measures to create risk management registers and treatment plans for each of the construction phases. Thank you for listening so far. I will now hand over to my teammates to continue the presentation.
The Melbourne to Sydney high-speed rail project will affect a large number of people, businesses, communities and governments, and with that comes several stakeholders that will be affected by the project. The key stakeholders identified in the project proposal include federal government, state government, local community people, gas, water, power and telecom utilities, industry groups, landowners, Indigenous groups / traditional landowners. Engagement should involve stakeholders to allow for a one-way flow of information from the decision makers to the stakeholders. A communication plan should be developed and implemented amongst both internal and external stakeholders at the earliest stage of the project, with both the ISO 31000 and AS/NZS 4360 agree that effective internal and external communication is important to ensure that those responsible for implementing risk management and those with a vested interest understand the basis on which decisions are made and why particular actions are required. Each risk identified within the 3 construction operation phases will be evaluated by a risk matrix as the AS/NZS 4360 standards suggest, a 5-row by 5-column risk matrix to decipher the risk likelihood and consequences. The x-axis has a scale of 1 to 5, with the lower numbers indicating a rare likelihood of occurrence, with the higher numbers predicting almost certainty. The y-axis ranks the consequence of the risk from 1 to 5 if it were to occur, with the lower numbers having little to no consequence and higher numbers indicating extreme impacts. The likelihood number rating is then multiplied by the consequence rating to equal total numeric rating, with 1 indicating a rare negligible risk and 25 indicating an almost certain catastrophic risk. This register has been used to evaluate the consequence, likelihood, and overall total risk rating given to risks identified within the 3 construction operation phases. The most effective methods to create a risk management plan involving the criteria laid out in the ISO 31000 for the Melbourne to Sydney high-speed railway system are a risk register and risk treatment plan. A risk register is a document which requires the organisation to outline all risks associated within the project and then grade their likelihood and impact on the project, while also allocating the person or team responsible for monitoring, mitigating, or avoiding the specified risks. Allocating the treatment or action for each risk in a risk treatment plan to specific department or person identified in the risk register makes the organisation and management accountable for each action and assists the project in avoiding the identified risk. From the slide, you can see our risk register outlines a risk description, category, consequences, consequence level, likelihood level, priority level, mitigation or control strategy, and owner of the risk. And our risk treatment plan outlines the risk, possible treatment option, preferred treatment options, risk rating from register, rating after treatment, personal responsible, and who will monitor the risk. When analysing the risk of the construction of the high-speed rail network, we can look at 2 types of risks, being vulnerability risk, which refers to the internal risk of the project, and threatening risk, which refers to the external risks associated with the project. The risks associated with the construction of the high-speed railway have been evaluated within the guidelines of the AS/NZS 4360 risk matrix. From the risk register, we can see there are several risks associated with constructing the railway network. One of the most dangerous risks is the potential for injury or death from machinery and equipment, as well as working in dangerous conditions, from low-level risk to unpredictable weather affecting the schedule of the project. There are several consequences associated with these risks, from the ability to shut the project down, to slow progress of the project due to changing weather conditions, and the rejection of the project from local communities who will be heavily affected by the construction of the network. By using the risk register, we are ensuring there is a plan to mitigate and control each risk as it happens. Outlined within the risk treatment schedule are several possible treatment options that can be used to aid in the mitigation process of each risk. As well as this, we can see that there are several ways to monitor the risk, and the treatment plan outlines who will be responsible for the monitoring of each risk, a lot of which falls on the project manager, as they are the ones responsible for the construction of the project. When analysing the risk of the construction of the rail line river crossing, the biggest risk that is faced is the chance for flooding due to unpredictable climate and weather. This can be very damaging to the construction of the river crossing, as it can create potential risks such as damage to the construction site and to the equipment and materials of the construction workers. Both would incur significant financial losses to the project and should be handled with a strategic flood risk management plan. There is a significant need to protect the safety of construction workers while they work on site. They can do this by prioritising the way in which they minimise the potential for human error by ensuring the working conditions are optimal. To ensure that all aspects are covered, each risk associated with the working environment, equipment use, and physical capacity of workers for the river crossing construction are listed within the risk register, as well as the risk treatment plan, to provide preventative measures to promote safety and encourage the necessity of risk management.
The location of the rail line through regional Victoria and New South Wales means that some of the construction will take place in wilderness areas. Construction in these places can cause a range of issues as it disturbs the natural environment and can irreparably damage the local flora and fauna. It can also affect the microclimate and soil of the area, which may eliminate the ability for plants and animals to live safely in those areas again. As with the other construction phases, the risks associated with completing works in wilderness areas are listed in the risk register and risk treatment plans. The risks associated with the construction in wilderness areas are potentially unavoidable. The risk assessment will focus on the stakeholder engagement and acknowledgement of the impact of the risks. The risk treatment plan involves a focus on communicating with the community to understand that some risks are necessary during construction and repairing the damage to the environment after the construction has been completed. These tools are then used alongside a qualitative risk matrix to prioritize the most significant risks and mitigate the environmental impacts. This report used the industry standards ISO 31000 and AS/NZS 4360 to complete a risk management framework for the high-speed rail project between Melbourne and Sydney. The risk management framework involves understanding the context of the project, ensuring that risk management is essential, and establishing the key stakeholders. 3 tools were chosen for the risk management of the high-speed rail construction: a qualitative risk matrix for the overall project, and then a risk register and risk treatment plan for each construction phase. A risk register is a tool which is used to identify all potential risks in a project and asks the project manager to give a brief description of a treatment strategy. Risk treatment plans take the strategies from the risk register and create a more in-depth plan to handle each risk and assign responsibility and tools to keep that person or persons accountable. Finally, a risk assessment involving a separate risk register and risk treatment plan was conducted for each construction phase. Using the risk register and risk treatment plans, recommendations for each phase of construction was made in this report. Safety and communication were key themes in all phases of construction. For the construction of a high-speed rail network, this report recommends to monitor the project to avoid scope creep, maintain high occupational health and safety standards throughout the project, and assign responsibilities to leaders and workers that understand the importance of risk management. The recommendations for construction phase of rail line river crossings include continuously monitoring weather patterns for each area. Research the history of floods and droughts over the specific rivers. Create work schedules based on weather patterns and worker safety. Implement safety policies and procedures and train construction workers to maintain their safety. The recommendations for the construction of rail lines in wilderness areas established in this report are: inform the local community about the environmental risks and the commitment to mitigate them after the construction phase. Seek advice from Indigenous community leaders on specific areas of land, especially if they're considered sacred. Use the post-construction phase as an opportunity to regenerate the environment